Almost exactly 1 year ago, I started playing World of Warcraft Classic for the very first time, and I've done a lot. I've leveled through pretty much every single zone, I've taken down every single raid boss, every world boss, and my feral druid is kinda almost full base. Okay, maybe not, but she's getting there, and of course I have done every single dungeon in the entire game. And since TBC pre-patch is dropping on January 13th, I thought between now and then, we would just have a little bit of fun. And that's why today, we are going to be ranking every single dungeon in the game, from worst to best. And remember, this is just my opinion, and as I play the game more and more for years to come, I'm sure my opinion on certain instances will change. And just before we get started, I would like to say that we are getting close to 15,000 subscribers, and if we could hit that by the end of the year, it would mean the absolute world to me. Anyway, enough waffling, let's get to it. So in 26th place, I've put Stockades. In my opinion, this is the absolute worst dungeon in the entire game. It's really just not exciting. It takes 20 to 25 minutes to clear, and is 93 mobs that all look identical. They could have at least made the layout unique, but no, they decided to make it 3 hallways with 4 square rooms each. If you're running this dungeon, you're either doing it once for the quests, or you're getting boosted. On the positive side though, there is a chunk of quests that you can do, plus it's extremely accessible to anyone since it's right there in Stormwind. In 25th place, I've put Ragefire Chasm. Now I ran this dungeon for the first time not long ago, and I think it's pretty fair to compare it to the Stockades since they're both right there in the capital cities. I definitely think that this is miles better than the Stockades since it does actually feel alive and looks fantastic and clearly had a lot of love put into creating it. That being said though, the dungeon itself is a yawn fest. I just don't feel very engaged whilst being in this place, and I think that's probably due to the fact that it's a level 14 dungeon. If it was for higher level players and a bit more difficult, I think this could definitely be higher on the list. Plus the loot in here, well, there isn't any, apart from a couple of green BOEs. In 24th place is Alderman. Now feel free to discredit me on this one because this is actually the only dungeon in the entire game that I have never run before. However, that being said, Alderman has been reprinted 50 times throughout World of Warcraft's history, so I feel like I have at least a decent idea of what to expect. And apart from attempting to run this dungeon once, I've never found myself itching to get into it. From what I've seen in other versions of the game, it's just a beige, bland, winding assortment of tunnels, but like I said, feel free to discredit me since I've never seen it in Classic before. Loot-wise though, it's actually pretty good. There's some really interesting pieces of gear, like the Horned Viking helmet, which I imagine is quite good for PvP, the Rock Pounder, which is great for any class wielding a two-hander, and of course, you cannot forget about the Pendulum of Doom, which if I'm not mistaken is the slowest weapon in the entire game, making it a fantastic weapon for leveling a warrior whilst two-hand tanking. So overall, the aesthetics suck, but the loot is definitely exciting. 23rd is going to be Temple of Atal Hakar, or quite commonly known as Sunken Temple. I feel like I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for this one. This one was hard to place for me, because it's a well-crafted dungeon with very interesting bosses, and you can definitely see and feel the love and care that went into creating this one. It has tons of little details placed literally everywhere, and some of the most fun I've had in WoW was in here on my mage doing the solo mage leveling farm thing. So if you do like this dungeon, I can definitely see why. But for me personally, it just doesn't tickle my taint. It doesn't excite me. I'm just not huge on dark and gloomy aesthetics. Plus loot wise, to my knowledge, there isn't really anything massive to chase after. And to be fair, I have only ran this dungeon once, technically twice. Once on my druid whilst leveling, and then again on my warrior in order to obtain the diamond flask trinket. So maybe I just need to run it more to appreciate it. Scarlet Monastery. So I know that Scarlet Monastery is technically all one instance ID, but for the purpose of the video I'm going to separate them into 4, that being Graveyard, Library, Armory and Cathedral. And in 22nd place is Library. When I think of Scarlet Monastery, I think of the long halls filled to the brim with mobs, and that's what this is pretty much. And that's it. It is the bog standard Scarlet Monastery dungeon in my opinion. I don't hate it, but I also don't particularly enjoy it. As for the loot though, well, there's a couple of nice caster pieces, that being primarily the Illusionary Rod, and of course the Hypnotic Blade. And I guess there's also also that weird dog whistle thing, which I guess is somewhat interesting. So overall, good loot, and the dungeon is just meh. In 21st place, I have put Black Fathom Deeps. Now this is a weird one for me, because actually running the dungeon I do find to be a bit boring. There's not a huge amount of mobs, plus there is a lot of swimming, which I just don't really enjoy. Plus the loot sucks. I mean, just take a look at the Naga battle gloves. Most green BOEs at this level are better. I suppose the Strike of the Hydra is okay, and so is the Bite of Serakiss. However, I can really appreciate the love that went into creating the dungeon, because it does the watery cave aesthetic perfectly. Plus it manages to fit structures in extremely well, and makes it feel like it's actually part of the cave. Plus you've got that little secret room with the quest inside, which I just think is a really nice touch. So overall, boring dungeon, but looks really good. 20th is Razorfen Crawl. In my opinion, this dungeon is the definition of meh. It doesn't excite me, but sure, I'll run it a couple of times for the quests plus XP. Unless I am a tool-handed wielding freak, because this dungeon holds one of the biggest upgrades for levelers, and that is of course Corpse Maker. It's extremely slow, has great DPS, plus offers 15 strength, and for level 30, that's insanely good. As for the aesthetic though, it's beige and a bit boring. However, it does fit in quite well with the Barons, since you were probably just leaving after spending 15 levels fighting the Razormane, and now you get to go and end it by fighting more Razormane. In 19th place, I have put No More Gone. Now, from what I hear, most people dislike this dungeon. However, I actually don't mind it that much. Now, don't get me wrong, I won't run it more than once, but that's mostly due to how large the dungeon is, which causes runs to take upwards of an hour. But there is so much XP to be had in this dungeon. Loads of different kinds of bosses, and some pretty interesting loot, such as Hydrocane, which lets the user breathe underwater, Acidic Walkers, which is pretty good for casters, and of course, Manual Crowd Pummeler. I think this dungeon could excite me more if I didn't main Feral Druid, because if I had a gold for every time I've done a pummeler run, well then I'd have more than 15 gold to my name. But I also don't think this dungeon suits WoW that much. I've never liked the idea of gnome and goblin machinery. I just don't see it fitting all that well into a fantasy game. Number 18 is Razorfen Downs. I definitely think that this is the superior Razorfen dungeon, and I think that's because the entire thing isn't themed around the Razorfen. The bosses in this dungeon are actually really cool. You've got Tutankash, which is technically an optional boss. You've got Mordresh, which is literally just a bunch of skeletons jamming it out. And the final boss, Amnanor, who is just a really cool looking skeleton. That being said though, the layout is boring. You go through a hallway and then go on a spiral to the end boss. It's just really not that exciting. Plus the loot isn't massively interesting either. The only really big ones that ring a bell to me are the Fleshhide Spalders, which is good for feral tanks I suppose, and Carapace of Tutankash, which again is quite alright for tanks. But apart from that, it's just a bit boring. Number 17, I have put Wailing Caverns. Now don't get me wrong, I like Wailing Caverns. I think it does the cave aesthetic really well, especially since parts of it are flooded with big bits of vines and moss and stuff growing all around, which just brings the vibes up. Plus the loot really isn't that bad for level 20. Leggings of the Fang is fantastic, glowing lizard scale cloak, mutant scale breastplate, it's all really good for the early levels. However, actually playing the dungeon I do find to be a bit boring, and that's because the mobs are really spread out, and a lot of the time you just end up clearing the dungeon one snake at a time. Plus a run does take really long to complete, mostly because of the escort. It's basically an escort quest, except there's no quest, and all it does is spawn in the final boss of the dungeon, which just ends up adding an extra 10 to 15 minutes to the end of every run. Number 16, Scarlet Monastery Graveyard. Now, I do actually quite like this dungeon. Like I said earlier, when you think of Scarlet Monastery, you think of the long halls filled with mobs. Well, that's not really what this is. It starts off in a big hall, but opens up to this giant graveyard where you are fighting tons of spirits and ghouls and such. Plus the final boss, Blood Mage Thalnos, looks really cool. He's a towering armoured spell-casting skeleton with a burning skull for a head. What's not to like about that? Alright, the loot. Because he only drops 2 pieces of loot, with the only good one being the Orb of the Forgotten Seer, which fair enough does pair really well with the dagger from Library. However, if you do want good loot, well that sucks because it will only drop from the rare mobs that spawn in here. I think this dungeon could be a lot more exciting to run if the rare mobs were just bosses, since that would give every class a chance at getting something really good every time they went into here. Number 15 is Shadowfang Keep. Now granted, I've only ran this dungeon once, but the one time that I did, I really enjoyed it. To my understanding, it's meant to be a haunted keep, and well, it does give off that vibe really well. There's a lot of, I guess you could call it gruesomeness, a lot of body parts and blood, etc, which makes it feel really cool inside. Plus the layout is interesting. It's not just walk through the hallway. You start at the gate and then you move through the building and into the courtyard and then back through again and then along the top of the wall, and I really like that. Loot wise, it's fine. It's a level 20 dungeon and the loot definitely suits that. Number 14 is Zul'Farrak. As far as beige dungeons go, this one is definitely my favourite, and I know I've said it in a previous video, but I really like the voodoo troll aesthetic, and I feel like this place mixes that really well with the sandiness. Plus it has some pretty unique things inside, like the staircase scenario, which can go really bad really quickly if you're not careful. Plus you have Gazrilla, which requires you to do a lot of prep beforehand in the hinterlands to even spawn him in, and your reward for doing so is one of the most unique trinkets in the entire game, which is of course the carrot on a stick. You've also got the graveyard XP farm, which can be done in so many different ways. Obviously with a mage, but I've also heard it's possible with a paladin, a warlock, or you can just get a group consisting of a healer and 4 warriors with a ravager. The loot from what I can remember isn't great though, apart from big bad pauldrons, which if you're a warrior will probably last you until level 60. But the sheer amount of XP that you get from this dungeon easily makes up for that. In 13th place, I've got Scarlet Monastery Armory. This to me is a great dungeon, but that might just be because I'm a melee main, and some of the most fun I had on my first character was in this dungeon. It was like the first big grind, running it over and over again, trying to get every piece of loot that I can from this place. Aesthetic wise, it is kinda meh though. Similar to Library, it's exactly what you think of when you think of Scarlet Monastery. Big halls filled with mobs, and admittedly it can get a bit boring after the 10th run, but again the amount of XP and loot available in this dungeon just makes up for all of that. In 12th place, I've put Scarlet Monastery Cathedral. This is the best of the 4 Scarlet Monastery dungeons in my opinion. It opens up into this giant courtyard and it's just filled with mobs, meaning you really have to be careful that you don't pull too many, and at the end you venture into the grand looking cathedral, which again is filled to the brim with mobs, and it just looks fantastic. And I suppose the boss fight is kinda cool. You kill Mograine and then Whitemane comes out and resurrects him, and you've got to fight them both together. However, that's all pretty standard as far as dungeons go. The reason I rate this dungeon so highly is because taking a Spellcleave group into this dungeon is some of the most fun I've ever had on any character in this game. You work together and coordinate with the rest of your group to complete the dungeon in 2 pools, and it's just freaking epic. Loot wise though, it's also pretty good. You've got Whitemane's head, Tryon's amulet, and of course the Hand of Righteousness. In 11th place, I have Dire Maul West. Again, I know Dire Maul is technically one instance ID, but I'm going to separate them all into 3, that being Dire Maul West, North, and East. Now I do enjoy all 3 of the dungeons, however I think Dire Maul West is definitely the weakest of the 3, but it is good, don't get me wrong. Starting off, there's a lot of really interesting mechanics in the dungeon. The first boss I believe you cannot kill until you've taken down all of the big tree patrols. Well, you can, but all the trees get pulled once you pull the boss. Plus, if you want to kill the boss Aimul Thar, you have to kill all of the elemental packs first, and this boss just looks so good. The elemental shield that's containing Aimul Thar looks sick, and overall the sheer massiveness of everything living around you just makes it feel so awesome. Now it's time for the top 10, and in 10th place I've put Lower Blackrock Spire. Probably an unpopular opinion, but I think this is a really good dungeon. I think the layout is very unique compared to other dungeons. It really feels like you have to go around the entire place. Plus, every boss is different. You go from killing ginormous ogres to fighting a giant spider to killing humongous wolves, and then end it by fighting a dragon lord thing. Plus, the loot is pretty solid. There's definitely something for everyone. You've got Black Crow for the hunters, Hands of Power for the casters, Reaver Claws for the warriors, and I actually do like the idea of chasing all of the gemstones for building the Seal of Ascension. I think that's a really cool mechanic. So overall, good dungeon with decent loot. In 9th place is Stratholme Living. Stratholme overall is a fantastic dungeon. It's the undead spooky vibe done correctly. I love traversing through an abandoned city that's now overran with the Scourge. It's an immaculate vibe. You start off by killing spirits and Scourge and ghouls, etc, but you then go into fighting this Scarlet Crusade again, and I like to think of it as like Scarlet Monastery Plus, and you of course end it by fighting one of the coolest bosses, Balnazar. He starts off as just another Scarlet Crusade looking guy, but transforms into this giant demon that you've then got to take down. As for the loot, it's pretty good. You've got Vambraces of the Saddest, Shadowcraft Spaulders, and how could we not mention Righteous Orbs? Even today, I still find myself running this dungeon on my main character for Righteous Orbs, because they are used for the best weapon enchant in the game and fetch a very reasonable price still. And in 8th place is Stratholme Undead. This is obviously the other half of Stratholme, and pretty much every boss in here I absolutely love. You've got Barthalas, who is a giant mutant patchwork thing, Anastari, who is a shrieking spirit, Nerub Enkin being a giant bug, and of course Baron Rivendare, who in my opinion is one of, if not the coolest looking dungeon bosses. I absolutely love the idea of a sword wielding undead riding on the back of an undead horse. It is so cool. And if I'm not mistaken, Baron Rivendare does come back as a raid boss in the Wrath of the Lich King version of Naxxramas, which just goes to show how legendary this boss really is. Plus he drops one of the most iconic pieces of loot, being the Cloak of the Black Baron, and if you're lucky enough, he might drop the Reins of the Death Charger, allowing you to ride on the back of Rivendare's horse. And I don't know about you, but I love the idea of there being something super rare that might drop. It brings a lot of excitement to every run. In number 7 is the Dead Mines, and this is probably an unpopular opinion, but I think this is a fantastic dungeon. It is by far the best low-level dungeon in the game. Every boss is unique. You go from fighting an ogre, to fighting a goblin inside of a shredder, to fighting a random murloc, and of course Captain Foreskin. Pair all that with the fact that the dungeon is somewhat tricky. It is very easy to pull too many in this dungeon. The rooms are just simply flooding with mobs. And how could I not mention the final room in this dungeon, where it opens up to a giant docked ship in a secret underground cave. I mean, just look at that. How can you say that this isn't cool? Now pair all that with the fact that the loot is insane for a level 17 dungeon. Every single boss drops something good. Blackened Defias armor, Cape of the Brotherhood, Cruel Barb, lavishly jeweled ring, Emberstone staff, the list just goes on and on. In 6th place, I have Upper Blackrock Spire. Again, might be a bit of an unpopular one, but I do really like running this dungeon. It is of course the only 10-man dungeon in the entire game, making it a very unique experience. Aesthetic wise, I actually think it is a bit bland. However, the bosses definitely make up for that. I do think Dracasath is an insanely cool boss who can actually be pretty tough to kill if it's not done right. And in my opinion, the beast is the coolest boss out of any dungeon. Seeing a building-sized inferno dog charging around the room can actually be somewhat intimidating. And how could we forget about the loot? The amount of good loot in here is just crazy. You've got True Strike Shoulders, Bell Striker, Painweaver's Band, basically anything from Rend Blackhand and anything from Valthalak is great. So honestly, how can I say that I don't enjoy this dungeon? Now it's time for my top 5 dungeons in WoW Classic. And first off is Dire Mall North. This is another dungeon that you can discredit me for if you like, because I've never ran this dungeon either. Just like Dire Mall West, this dungeon creates the vibe that you are tiny, everything else is huge. But the reason I like this dungeon so much is because of the end game potential, primarily through Dire Mall tribute runs, which can award some insanely good gear, and of course the DMT buffs, which are essential for raiding these days. It's also got direct access into the library, which would allow players to turn in quests for some very powerful gear. To put it simply, I really like the idea of dungeons having use outside of just clearing it and then resetting. In fourth place, Dire Mall East. Again, might be an unpopular opinion, but I think this is the best of the three Dire Mall dungeons. This one is much more nature themed than the rest, but it has some really cool mechanics. You've of course got Puslin, who offers a pretty unique quest where you've got to chase him around the dungeon and he'll award you with the Crescent Key. And before you can take on the final boss, you've first got to take down Zevrim, who has the most annoying mechanic in all of classic WoW, where he sacrifices a player, and in my experience, 9 times out of 10 that will kill them. Now, like I said with Dire Mall North, one thing I value a lot is the utility a dungeon has outside of just clearing it, and this one has a lot of it. You've got the Mage Water quest, Satyr's Bow farming, and of course herb farming and mining farming. But overall, this is just a really beautiful dungeon. I really like the center part where everything has just overgrown into its own little ecosystem. Also, big shout out to Big Tree Man, who smashes the door open and then just keels over and dies. And in third place is Scholomance. I love the idea of an academy for necromancers. It's such a unique idea. You're fighting the teachers, you're fighting the students, and you're fighting the monstrosities that they have created. The love and care that went into creating the dungeon is definitely present. You can see the tiny little details that have been put everywhere, and it just makes it so immersive. Every mob and boss is unique from one another, each with their own mechanics. Loot wise is also pretty significant, housing pretty much all of tier 0.5 sets for every class. But of course, how could we not mention Dark Runes? Even still, these things go for crazy prices on the auction house. And even in TBC, farming Dark Runes will probably be a great gold farm. So easily, one of the coolest dungeons in the game. Now I know for a fact that this will probably be an unpopular opinion, but my second favourite dungeon in the game is Maraudon. Honestly, I was tempted to put this one in first place, because it is easily the best looking dungeon in the game by a mile. Any other cave themed dungeon in the game has nothing on this place. The whole way through the dungeon, there is bright fluorescent colours mixed with the dull greyness of stone. And for a cave in a fantasy game, this is just perfect. And to top that off, the loot is really good. You've got the albino croc scale boots, blackstone ring, infernal trickster leggings. There is definitely something for everyone. Plus the gold making from here is pretty good too. And no, we're not going to count Maraudon boosting. But a few months back, I was farming elemental earth, I was mining mithril, picking up blindweed and ghost mushrooms, which would net at least 150 to 200 gold an hour. And the best dungeon in the entire game, Blackrock Depths. It is absolutely no surprise that I think that this is the best dungeon in WoW Classic. There was just so much to do. The dungeon scales from level 50 all the way up to 60. There's something like 45 quests to complete, 40 something different bosses, and an endless stream of items to get. Plus it has some of the most iconic loot in the entire game. Hand of Justice, Savage Gladiator Chain, Iron Foe. You've also got unique encounters like the Arena, the Molten Core attunement. There's just so much stuff to do that I could probably sit here and talk about it for hours on end. And that is it, I believe. I really hope I've not missed anything out. And just before we end, remember, this is just my opinion. You are more than welcome to tell me that I am wrong in the comments. And like I said in the intro, I just felt like making something a little different. And once the pre-patch drops in January, I imagine I'll probably be busy with whatever new comes out and I won't have time to make a video like this for a while. So let me know in the comments what you think. I also thought about doing something like ranking every zone in WoW Classic. I thought that might be something fun to do. And admittedly, I feel like there is a lot more that I could say about each dungeon, but to be honest, I didn't want the video to be hours long, so I tried to keep it to about a minute per dungeon. Anyway, I think that's enough yapping for today. Let me know in the comments what you thought of the video, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you all later.